Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, How to Create Value from Regenerative Agriculture in Your Business. And by your business, we don't just mean agricultural business, because this is relevant, as we will show, to the entire value chain that's derived from agriculture. My name is Arie van Berkel. I'm a VP and Group Director here at Lux Research, and I'll be moderating today's sessions. Presenting today are my colleagues Tim Apachanda, Senior Analyst, and Laura Crishfield, Senior Research Associate here at Lux Research. Throughout this webinar, you can type any questions you have in the question box on your screen. If we have enough time, we will answer all the questions, although I must admit that my experience tells me we never have enough time. You always have a lot of questions. So if your question doesn't get answered, please do not hesitate to email it to questions@luxresearchinc.com. That's questions@luxresearchinc.com. And we will respond to your questions. So at this point, let's no longer hesitate and jump right into the presentation. Laura, please take the floor. It's yours.
Thank you, Arie, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for listening in today. The focus of today's webinar is to explore regenerative agriculture and its potential to create a more resilient and profitable CPG value chain. But before I dive into the webinar, I want to first start here by level setting, as I'm going to assume that we've heard this term regenerative agriculture before, but let's avoid the brand hype and kick off by getting to the bottom of the term. Regenerative agriculture is the concept of reimagining human relations with agroecosystems to improve the land's carrying capacity while continuously improving the land itself. At its core, regenerative means to leave something better off than before. Now, I know this sounds too good to be true, and clearly we can see that this concept is attracting a great deal of attention. So you may be now asking yourself, well, where do I start? So the big question that we will aim to answer through this webinar is, how do you get regenerative ag to work for you without falling into pitfalls? And we will answer this question through first uncovering what are the challenges conventional agriculture will be facing. We'll then discuss how regenerative agriculture relates to the CPG value chain and where it can play a key role in overcoming the prevailing challenges. And then lastly, we want to take a check into reality, and we will walk through a couple of do's and don'ts that you will need to consider when engaging in regenerative ag. To help uncover why regenerative ag is imperative and what we're going to be up against, my colleague Tim is here to discuss a few of the challenges that we'll be facing with conventional ag.
Thank you, Laura. I'm Tim. I'm a senior analyst at Lux. Let me take you through the challenges of conventional agriculture. A third of agricultural land is severely degraded. It translates to one soccer field equivalent of soil is degraded every 5 seconds. We all know that soils are essential to life on Earth. More than 95% of the food we eat relies on soil. If we continue with the current agriculture practices, 90% of the soils could become degraded by 2050. In other words, soil erosion can lead up to 50% loss in crop yields, while its economic cost can be several billions of dollars. Soil degradation is caused by fertilizer use, livestock overgrazing, resulting in soil compaction, erosion, deforestation, decreasing water availability, salinization, acidification, and loss of some of the important nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus. Globally, agriculture uses about 72% of all surface and groundwater for irrigation. Agriculture is the major source of pollution in rivers, streams, water bodies, creating dead zones. The second challenge is the loss of biodiversity. Since 2000, 2 million square kilometers of wild and undeveloped land is lost for agriculture. It results in loss of wild plants, animals, and beneficial species such as pollinators, predators, and parasitoids. Close to 75% of the crops depend on pollinators for food production. We are risking food production with the loss of biodiversity. The current agriculture has resulted in monocultures. Today, about 25 species of crops meet 75 to 80% of the global calorie requirements, resulting in 68% of global species lost. We all know the stories of potato blight in Ireland, coffee rust in Sri Lanka, Panama wilt in South America, citrus greening in Florida, and how monocultures have decimated food production, resulting in human suffering. The third concern of conventional agriculture is nutrient density. United States Department of Agriculture data shows a drop of essential nutrients for human well-being, such as protein, calcium, phosphorus, iron, riboflavin, and vitamin C in conventionally grown produce. 5 to 40% nutritional content of vegetables have dropped in the past 5 to 7 decades. At times, it's also called as biomass dilution. Soil health and human health are interlinked. Franklin Roosevelt once said, "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." The next challenge is about farmers who produce food. Livelihood of farmers and farm workers is in risk. In addition to the aging farmers in the United States, the average funds generated on farm for farm operators to meet their living expenses and debt obligations has been negative. Farmers are dependent on every farm input, whether it is seed, fertilizer, pesticides. Farm subsidies still make up to 23% of the total farm income. Last year, 276 farming operations in the United States have filed for bankruptcy. The next challenge is climate change. Food and agriculture is an important part of climate change discussion. The global food system is responsible for about 21 to 37% of annual greenhouse gas emissions, and agriculture contributes to about 20%. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizers and enteric fermentation of cattle and rice paddies are the major sources of carbon dioxide emissions in agriculture. 1 ton of nitrous oxide emission from nitrogen fertilizers is equivalent to 298 tons of carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. Similarly, a ton of methane from enteric fermentation of cattle or rice paddies release 56 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Climate change has several impacts on agriculture, such as extreme weather conditions like intense drought and rainfall, shift in seasons, spread of insects and other pests, and shorter growing seasons are becoming a new normal. In addition, geopolitical factors like ongoing Russia's war on Ukraine is significantly disrupting agriculture supply chains and resulting in higher food prices. Climate change and the changing climate solutions or situations like the current war is a pretty toxic mix, like the Molotov cocktail. Well, there's a ray of hope to abate these concerns. Studies reveal increasing soil carbon in croplands through improved soil management and agriculture practices can contribute to annual carbon emissions reductions of up to 1.85 billion tons per year, equivalent to removing up to 400 million cars from the roads. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, predicts that we have a 12-year timeline to radically shift agriculture systems worldwide.
Thanks, Tim. So in this next section, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to take a look at the CPG value chain to better understand where those prevailing challenges pose potential risks and how companies today are being negatively impacted. We will also be talking about how regenerative ag can come into play and create a more resilient and profitable CPG value chain. Now, it's important to recognize that the challenges facing agriculture are not only impacting agriculture as an industry, and we can see that by looking at the CPG value chain, which we have simplified into production, supply chain, and consumption. And while we may associate agriculture mainly within the production stage, it's a critical piece of the CPG value chain, which is extremely complex with other industries. What starts on the farm is carried through to other industries like apparel, home care, consumer health. Therefore, the challenges Tim has highlighted are not going to just impact agriculture. The challenges will create and magnify serious risks across the value chain for all of CPG. Now, we are going to be walking through these three main stages of the value chain and looking at these points of risks influenced by the challenges. We'll also look at a real-life example of how these risks have impacted CPG businesses today. So starting with production. Climate change will affect different regions in different ways. So production may shift, and as a farmer, you may be limited in what you're growing. There's also gaining access to alternative inputs, meaning resources have been degraded, so what will you do when water, energy, and land is limited? And then there's facilitating financially successful agriculture. Farming is already risk averse, and adding on those 5 challenges we mentioned brings additional pressure. And so the example I'll look at for this is mainly related to climate change, where in recent years, coffee production has been hit by extreme weather events and pest events, which can be considered a result from climate change. This in turn drove coffee prices of certain beans to increase over 30% in 2021. Coffee-dependent companies like Nestle had to increase prices by almost 2%. On that note, Nestle's organic sales growth remains positive, but the takeaway here is that weather-related events increased input costs. Now, if coffee prices rise too high, more cost-conscious consumers may be motivated to turn to other caffeinated drinks. In the next stage for supply chain, it is important for waste to be managed properly considering legal obligation, and that's also the same with the supply chain's environmental impact. But here we're also seeing navigating materials of concern. So this is mainly a matter of achieving better resource use efficiency. And in this example, we're talking about the risk of increasing costs due to supply chain disruptions. Because in this case, General Mills announced prices on many of its products would go up as much as 20% due to strains on its supply chain, which these were caused by multiple factors related to materials of concern and product loss. So companies need to ask themselves, with supply chain disruption likely to continue, how do you increase prices without losing customers? And then lastly, looking at consumption. Consumers today are more concerned about what they are buying and how it was produced. They're demanding products with low environmental impact that are affordable and high quality. And these underlying factors are driving CPG companies to come up with strategies to address those changing consumer preferences. At the same time, enhancing traceability and transparency is important for expediting food recalls that could lead to financial losses or even damage brand reputation. And we see this through 3 recent cases related to allegations about falsely advertising cereals as healthy when they were also high in sugar. Between Mondelez, Post Foods, and Kellogg, $43 million in financial losses went towards settling lawsuits related to product labeling. So what we can see here is that claims made on food labels, whether that's identifying ingredients as artificial or aspects about the supply chain, so how were the animals treated, what was the environmental impact, the message here is that companies need to improve transparency. So overall, we can see that the value chain requires resiliency and scientific support. Now, where can regenerative ag come into play to drive this, Tim?
Well, Laura, regenerative agriculture can drive resilience and profits. Studies have shown higher profits in integrated regenerative farming systems. Though regenerative grain fields have shown 29% lower production, but they have demonstrated 78% higher profits over traditional corn production systems. The whole farm income was increased by another 20% with the addition of livestock in the farming system. Let me share an example of a farmer, Gabe Brown, a well-known regenerative farmer in the United States, who notes that his farm makes about $100 an acre per year versus an average conventional farm that makes 10 cents to $3 an acre per year. Biodiversity in regenerative farms offers several ecological services such as low pestilence and rich soil microbiome that increases nutrient use efficiency and uptake. Pests love conventional crops. Compared to regenerative farms, pest incidence was 10 times more in conventional corn farms, while insects hate biodiverse farms. Compared to monocultures, insect feeding rate on crops was 44% lower in biodiverse farms. Monocultures had higher levels of pesticide use and an increase in pest and diseases. Cover crops can increase carbon sequestration by 83% in no-till systems. Perennial pasture and conservation tillage can lead to significantly higher organic carbon sequestration. Cover crops, crop rotation, reduced tillage help to increase soil organic matter, reduce runoff, improves water holding capacity, nutrient cycling and carbon sequestration, and nitrogen loss, nurture beneficial soil microbes, increase on-farm biodiversity and beneficial insects. In the Midwestern United States, cover crops between corn and soybean production can reduce nitrate runoff by 43%, reduce fertilizer and pesticides, improve soil health and water quality. Regenerative agriculture practices has potential for 30% of global climate mitigation through emission reductions and carbon sequestration. Each ton of carbon sequestered in soil has the potential to remove more than 3.5 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Let me share a couple of examples. At the start of COVID-19 pandemic, 46 cotton farming families in Brazil's Minas Gerais region began practicing regenerative agriculture. Cotton was their main crop, but after getting introduced to regenerative systems, they planted fruits and vegetables. Interestingly, cotton production tripled, and saffron, which was one of the intercrop, yields were up 7 times. So this shift not only increased food production, but also revived area's cotton spinning tradition, which was slowly dying out because agrochemical tainted cotton triggered allergic reactions in the local artisans. So regenerative agriculture's impact is not only on production and ecosystem health, it can revive local traditions and culture, building resilient communities. Let me share another example from General Mills. In 2019, General Mills made a commitment to advance regenerative agriculture on 1 million acres of farmland by 2030. Agriculture accounts for about 60% of their greenhouse gas footprint. They also partnered with Soil Health Academy and Understanding Agriculture to pilot projects in North America. In addition, they developed practical tools for coaching and offering technical assistance to farmers, customized plans for implementation in their operations, soil health testing, networking with communities, and economic assessment to demonstrate impact on outcomes over a period of time. Diversifying their value chain by working on a cropping strategy with participating farmers were vital. General Mills mandate their farmers to cultivate 3 to 5 different crops in a 3-year period, like warm season grass, cool season grass, non-legume broadleaf, and legumes. They even commercialized Carenza, a perennial cereal that has potential to reverse soil and environmental degradation. It has 16 times more root biomass than soybeans. So there's a huge potential for companies to think out of the box and find ways to commercially exploit the underutilized crops like Carenza.
Great, Tim. But I think we may have almost painted too rosy of a picture of regenerative ag as being something companies can just dive into and instantly see improvements in farm profits, biodiversity, and carbon sequestration. So let's uncover examples where regenerative ag was not necessarily carried out properly.
Well, Laura, you're right. The regenerative agriculture need not be that rosy, or there are several examples that it has not been rosy at all. So regenerative agriculture needs a good realistic strategy and a planning to avoid pitfalls. Let me take you through an example from Sri Lanka. In April 2021, Sri Lankan government banned the import of all synthetic agrochemicals, putting their 2 million farmers in dire straits. Crop production decreased and food prices rose 3 times. Sri Lanka was self-sufficient in rice production earlier, but this ban resulted in 20% decrease in rice production. They had to import rice worth $450 million. Same was the case with tea, a major export crop, was also affected. The government is currently compensating about $200 million to farmers as direct compensation and an additional $150 million in price subsidies to rice farmers who incurred loss. Let me take you to another corporate example of Pipeline Foods. Pipeline Foods is an example of biting more than one can chew scenario. This company was started in 2017 to scale up its activities in North America in 2019. The company bought SunOpta corn and soybean unit for $66 million. They invested heavily on infrastructure necessary to support the commercialization of crops, grain elevators, infrastructure for processing and sorting, provided financial and technical assistance to the networks of farmers and ranchers in 35 odd states. In 2019, they partnered with Rabobank to provide loan for farmers transitioning to organic agriculture. All this resulted in huge debts, resulting in bankruptcy, leaving farmer members in helpless state.
Tim, those are some really interesting examples. And what comes into my mind is that there are a number of things clients should avoid. The first is replicating the conventional agriculture model. We don't want to reinvent the wheel here. So, Tim, how should clients ensure that what they're doing is actually regenerative?
That's an important point, Laura. There's an urgent need to radically redesign and restructure the current agriculture system. A farm is not a machine that fits into the input-output model. Ecosystems doesn't follow a linear path. It's complex. There are several variables: pollinators, predators, soil microbes, pests, nutrient cycles, both biotic and abiotic factors affecting crop growth and development. It's not just chemistry or a substitution type of agriculture where fertilizers are substituted with compost. Ecology, biodiversity, and social issues are extremely important to scale regenerative agriculture. Companies need to understand regenerative agriculture at a deeper level and set goals accordingly. One size fits all doesn't work here.
Now, when you do regenerative agriculture, there is the potential for risk, and a lot of those risks are going to be on the supply chain side. So, Tim, what do we do about this? How do you make a regenerative initiative successful?
Laura, it's very important to communicate with farmers, understand their concerns, build long-term relationships and contracts too. Communicate the real, measurable, verifiable data from the farmers to the consumers. Integrity of the supply chain is very important. Digital technologies can help to create transparency in the supply chain for the consumers to trust that all that is happening is not a hogwash.
And as you mentioned with the Pipeline Foods example, we saw that Pipeline Foods was unsuccessful by implementing a short-term strategy.
You're right. Yes, Pipeline Foods started off very well. They were very ambitious, took on all tasks onto themselves, wanted to scale their operations in a short span, invested a lot on infrastructure and acquired few companies. End result, huge debts. There's an old saying, those who fail to plan to fail. This was the case with Pipeline Foods. So Laura, there's an urgency to transform human activities from destruction to regeneration. We all have a purpose to change the world. Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, I'm fired up, and we've covered a lot today. So let me sum things up. And we have 3 key takeaways for you to remember. The first, regenerative ag can address multiple changes that conventional agriculture faces. Secondly, regenerative ag can provide value for multiple industries across the CPG value chain. It extends beyond the farm. And then lastly, regenerative agriculture is enabled by a modern biological understanding of agricultural systems and relying less on chemistry on its own. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim and Laura, for this very interesting presentation on regenerative agriculture. I can see a lot of debate happening in the questions box already, and please, if you're listening, don't hesitate to type your questions there. Let me start by posing you a question that's a little bit more towards the end of the presentation that arose. I think you mentioned two things that were interesting there. One is that regenerative ag is very complex, a lot of moving objects. And then in the very next line, you mentioned how digital and data management plays a significant role. So can you elaborate a bit more on that? How is digital an enabler for regenerative ag?
Yeah, thank you, Ari. But digital technologies that have been used in precision agriculture, I see a huge potential for those technologies to be used in regenerative agriculture because consumers are looking for traceability and transparency, actual verifiable, measurable results that's happening in the farm. Everybody, especially the millennial population, is worried about how fruit is produced, where food is produced, and they want to know what they're consuming. So when I say digital technologies, it could be used for at production and the entire supply chain. For instance, sensors, biosensors could be used to analyze the soil and understand how healthy the soil is, what are the deficiencies that are in the production process, and how the operational efficiencies can be enhanced. So there are several digital technologies through sensors, hyperspectral imagery, using drones and UAVs. These are all that are widely used in precision agriculture, can be adopted in regenerative agriculture. Same as with the supply chain, whether it is storage or production or transportation, how food is processed, communicating these things, whether we use blockchain technology or digital tools. I feel there's a huge scope for integrating technologies which have been successful in other sectors to bring those technologies into regenerative agriculture and make it realistic for the consumers and help the entire supply chain, Ari.
All right, so Tim, that also prompts another question that I can see happening here, and it's a bit further up in the presentation where you mentioned that there's actually quite a lot of bankruptcies also in farming, and everything you just mentioned sounds pretty costly. So far, my impression is you're only adding costs. Are there ways of reducing costs? How does regenerative ag help you to improve your bottom line and reduce cost?
Yeah, that's a very important question that has not been addressed by organizations or companies that are into regenerative agriculture, Ari. At the moment, if you see most of the activities in regenerative agriculture, it has been copying the conventional model wherein all the inputs are bought, whether seeds, fertilizers, or pesticides. And it's more like a substitution farming that we see. Instead of buying the fertilizers, you buy compost and supplement those nutrients for the crop growth and development. But this would be a very expensive activity if you are substituting inputs. That is, when I say substituting inputs, substituting the synthetic chemical inputs with natural organic inputs that could be used in regenerative agriculture. I think what is required is to identify technologies which are low cost to reduce the cost of production, because farmers do not have any control over the market, but they have full control on reducing the cost of production. So could there be some innovations in biostimulants by using biofertilizers and biopesticides, rather than farmers buying every unit to spray their, say, 100 or 1,000 acres of farm? Could there be buying some basic cultures and multiplying them in their farms? Or could such trainings, or could companies come and providing those seed technologies wherein farmers can amplify those for their entire activities? Or could farmers be taught how to produce their own seeds? Because today farmers are totally dependent on seeds. Say 30 or 40 years ago, farmers were producing their own seeds because seed cost, depending on different crops, is about 30 to 40% of the cost of production. So can the cost on seed production be reduced by involving farmers to produce quality seeds? Can the inputs be produced utilizing the locally available resources? Can compost be produced by utilizing the wastes of agriculture and the livestock, so that can we create a circular economy? So these are some of the innovations which are extremely important. There are success stories in small scale in different parts of the world. Can those be integrated to scale regenerative agriculture? These are some of the most questions and innovations that need to happen in this field, Ari. Sorry for the long answer.
No, thank you. It has a lot of information there and a lot of questions, and I'm quite sure that most of those questions were rhetorical in this case. So a lot of yes answers there implied, I think. Speaking of questions, our time is up. There's still quite a few questions in the chat box, and we'll be getting to those and answering you offline. Meanwhile, thank you very much, Laura. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, dear audience. It was great to have you here. Please look at our upcoming webinars, as you can see is displayed here, and hope to see you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.